Hello, everyone. We're just going to give everyone just a couple more seconds to get logged on before we get started today. While we're waiting, if you wouldn't mind, as always, sharing in the chat who you are, where you're from, and if this happens to be your first session with us, even though it's our last, that's okay. Go ahead and put that in the chat as well. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started today. We're not sure exactly how long today's session will take, but as always, we'll make sure to end on time at the latest. This is our last session. I can't believe it's already our last session. It actually should have been done already, but we took a week off for the STEM day week off for equity. But we're back now and we're finishing up. If you weren't with us last week, we have one more session today with Julie on some professional development around high quality teaching and learning, especially in this type of environment. Jessica from Harvard LabXchange. I think actually just joined us, as I was about to say, wasn't on quite yet. And she'll be here to answer your questions about the platform and maybe do a little bit of a primer at the end for those of you who are brand new. And what we're really hoping is that we can hear from all of you about the pathways that you've developed, whether they're complete or in progress, and what your hopes for them are, and any obstacles that you've come across. So that's kind of our biggest focus for today, is wanting to know where you are, what your obstacles have been, what you've found, what you've been able to create, and maybe we'll have a little bit of time to brainstorm some solutions to the holes that you have in your content so far. So welcome. Today's focus is assessment practices, and Julie will be talking about those assessment practices soon. We all know that it's critically important to have data on our learning, but we also all know that it's very, very easy for assessments to kind of go awry and take the focus away from the learning itself. So Julie's going to talk a little bit about that and what makes for a high quality assessment that focuses our learning instead of distracting from it. Make sure you save your questions, write them down if they pop into your head. We're going to take questions throughout and at the end. You can also put them in the chat and we'll try to catch them there, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. As always, we have a few folks with us today. Angie Kastning is in the background running everything. She doesn't usually have her camera on, but you can pretend that she's waving hi right now. We also have Julie Hasfield, Keisha Harding, and Jessica Silverman from Harvard LabXchange. All of those folks will get to say hi in a little bit, introduce themselves if they're new to you, and we'll learn a little bit more about their focuses on this project. So again, we're gonna jump right in here to Julie's lesson, but as we're going, if you haven't already, make sure you say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Let us know if this is your first session. And as questions arise, you can either write those down for later or go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll try to go to them when they make sense throughout the session. So Julie, I'm strangely excited to learn about assessment practices. I feel like I lose education cred sometimes when I talk about the fact that I actually kind of super like assessments when they're done right. So what are we going to learn today?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. So yeah, assessment practices can sound boring, but we are so far beyond the multiple choice and standardized test idea of assessment that we all have known to know and hate. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about how assessment practices are important when we think about STEM pedagogy and practices. So this is our fourth session. The first session, you remember we talked about design thinking and the importance of using a design process when designing for digital learning, and also for the students to engage in design processes throughout their online learning. And then the second session was about inquiry-based instruction. And then last week was cognitive demand of tasks. So we talked about making sure that students are really cognitively engaging with the material and not just passively receiving. And then so today we are moving on to assessment practices. So there are three features of effective assessments. So one is learning outcomes. So what do we want students to know and be able to do? We need to have that really, really clear in the beginning of our our work. So rather than just saying, okay, we're teaching about this and randomly putting pieces of lessons together, we really want to have a very clear understanding of, by the end of this, what do we need them to know? And then evidence. What evidence are we collecting for each of these outcomes? And then feedback. How do we move learning forward with the feedback that we're giving students on the assignments? So there was one of the kind of fathers of classroom assessment he wrote this article called Classroom Assessment. He also wrote one called Inside the Black Box. And so Dylan just gives some ideas on how we can make classroom assessments effective. And so there's this list here. So again, making sure you're sharing the intentions and criteria, those learning outcomes with students, engineering effective classroom conversation, providing the feedback, activating students as owners of their own learning, and then activating students as resources for each other, and then of course the evidence used to adapt instruction. So not just only collecting the evidence, but making sure it's being used to change the way that you are conducting your lessons. So here's just a little bit more about that first one. So clarify and share intentions and criteria. A lot of times as teachers, we know what we're looking for, but it's all in our head and we're not sharing that with students. So we need to make sure that we are being really clear about the expectations of our students. If there's something we're grading on, why aren't we sharing that with students? We need to be really clear that all of our assignments reflect that what we want them to be able to know, and that they know all of the learning expectations. And this last one here is, do our assignments reflect the targets that students had the opportunity to learn? So that sounds really obvious, but there was a study, it's a famous study called the baseball study, and basically they did a reading test with students, and the reading assignment that they did was on, it was just some short text about baseball. And they found that students who had a high level of background knowledge in baseball, even if they were poor readers, did really well on the reading assessment. So that background knowledge in baseball led to a really inaccurate assessment of their reading skills. And this gets into a lot of equity issues too. So when we're giving students reading assignments or giving them any kind of work, we need to be thinking about, is there bias in this assignment for students who have had certain opportunities and some who have not. So just being really careful about that. This is an example of how you might think about organizing assessments when you're thinking about those learning outcomes and gathering evidence. So for each learning outcome, you want to know what your success indicators are. So again, knowing what those targets are. So interpret products of whole numbers, that's the learning outcome. But how will I know if they're interpreting products of whole numbers? That's what the success indicator is. So you already know those ahead of time. And then the evidence is what you're collecting. And really, we want to make sure that evidence is collected over multiple time periods and represents multiple modes of assessments. So we want formative assessment, summative assessments. We want some of those short quizzes, but we also want some observational things too. If we're having students manipulate materials, maybe we're looking for certain things as they're using manipulatives to learn about multiplication. So we want to know what those pieces of evidence are that we're looking for, and then collect multiple versions of it. And then after we collect that evidence, we want to make sure that the feedback we're giving is moving students forward. So of course, most of you have heard of formative versus summative assessment. So on formative, the results work as feedback, effective feedback to students and teachers. But I think more important is that formative assessment, ideally, should be where students are tracking and communicating about their evolving learning. So it's not about the teacher being tracking everything, but the students have to have some ownership as well. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And then summative assessment, of course, is what we're mostly familiar with. achievement tracked by learning target, grades, and then of course the standardized tests that we all have to eventually comply with. This is a study that was done by John Hattie. He's a famous educational researcher. He did a meta study of multiple educational studies that had been done over many, many decades. He said, what are the top influences on achievement? If we look at all of these studies, thousands of studies that have been done in education over 10 years. And he found that one of the best influences on student achievement is self-reported grades. So again, this is about students taking ownership over their own learning. It's about students reflecting on their own progress. It's about them making predictions about what how they're going to do on an assignment, and then having conversations with their teacher about alignment and misalignment of those predictions. You'll notice that the third one down is formative evaluation. So again, thinking about making sure that students are getting feedback and that instruction is changed based on the formative evaluation the teacher is collecting. If you go on down, even on the last one, feedback. So again, students need that constant feedback in order to improve. It does no good if we collect an assignment and we give them an F, but we don't give them any feedback on why that happened and how they can improve. Or even if we do, then not even giving them the opportunity to make those changes and to improve their grades. So the question that we have for this platform is, how can we design digital learning that includes opportunities for clear learning outcomes, the collection of multiple pieces of evidence of learning, and provide timely and effective feedback? So moving beyond the traditional quizzes and multiple choice, thinking more broadly about formative assessment, about students tracking their own progress, thinking about maybe a portfolio model. So these are some things that we want to think about as we're moving forward with digital learning, so that we're not just, again, moving from this traditional way of teaching and moving it online, but really transforming the way we're thinking about teaching and learning. I'll stop there and open it up for any questions or thoughts, and then I think Jessica is going to share with us some ways that we can use assessment practices and tools on LabXchange itself.
That's good. Julie, I do want to mention that a few folks were mentioning in the chat, and those of you who are reading the chat have seen this, that they're looking for all of the past recordings. Angie just posted that they have all been recorded. There'll be links sent out to everyone to view, so you'll be able to have access to those to review or to share with colleagues. In the meantime, however, if there are any questions about these assessment practices in particular, go ahead and unmute your microphone or raise your hand or let me know in the chat and we can go to you. And we'll give you just a second to do that. And if there aren't any at this point, we will jump over to Julie. Keisha, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I actually wanted to piggyback off of a couple of points that Julie made and offer some things that I did in the classroom that yielded way more results. When she says having students really track their own progress, that is the key. That is the most important part of a student being able to set goals for themselves, to move towards those goals. So some of the things that I did that I think are still transferable on a digital platform, I had a standard kind of data sheet that they had. So we might take an assessment or we might have written an essay or something like that. The top was like a graph, and they would take a colored pencil or whatever and kind of graph their outcomes at the top. And then there was always a set of questions at the bottom. Kind of, where are you, why, what were those couple of questions that you missed and what was confusing about it, all those things. So, they had a reflection point, and that was something that was ongoing. So that sheet went into their data folder. It was something that we pulled out every time we had some sort of summative assessment or even weekly. Taking a whole data day for your kids is going to give you so much bang for your buck. If you just kind of give kids their scores and breeze past it, not have them talk about it and engage with it, it's not going to be a helpful tool for them to move themselves forward. So don't be afraid to take that extra time to do like full-on data days with your kids. Have them have those portfolios. It's great because this does transfer digitally. Maybe before you had a your little file system and everyone has their name and all their stuff in it. Keep it in your classroom. Kids get it when they're doing these days. But now it's an online portfolio. Maybe it's a something you do on Google. Maybe LabXchange, you create a pathway, or the kids create pathways that could express some of those portfolio ideas and some of their mastery. But I just want to hone in on Julie's point of the students have to be the one really assessing themselves and engaging with one another. Also, and then I'll let us move forward, don't be afraid to have kids give feedback to one another. I have found that kids, like we might do a presentation, and at the end of everyone's presentation, we do warm and cool feedback. It teaches kids, and from a social emotional perspective, it teaches how to receive feedback. It teaches how to give polite feedback to somebody else, which are all great for those social emotional skills, and really gets kids listening to one another. And those are just a few things I've done in my career that have really pushed my kids forward and made them feel empowered to learn and grow. So I really want to just, of all the things that we're talking about in terms of assessment, those kind of two things are really important to me. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
And Rebecca, in the chat's asking what are some of the effective ways of having students self-reflect and report. And I think that you just mentioned some of those ideas. There's so many different things you can do. But one thing I'll add is that it takes practice. It takes practice. So when I have worked at schools that have really focused on this, and it's a long process. You have to start in the elementary, and you have to get them used to doing that. But I will say that Keisha and I worked at a school where it was the worst performing school in the state of Tennessee, a middle school. And after 3 years, we were completely off the state's priority list. And one of those practices was exactly what she said. Very successful turnaround there.
Not only off the priority list, we were actually a level 5 school our very last year. And I just put that out there because a lot of it was because we were so student-centered and taking the time for students to track their own data and create those goals for learning and growth. That was a key thing that kind of turned around the learning culture of our school. So I think that's why we're so passionate about it. But don't be afraid. The kids have way more in them to reflect on themselves and set those goals than sometimes we give them credit for. We just got to give them the structures, and then from there they really will. But yes, it does take time, and we've got to pull away from those traditional ways of thinking 85% is mastery and we're going to get this based off of multiple choice assessment. There are numerous ways to get the information that you need. So yes.
Thank you. So Jessica, what exists within the LabXchange platform that can really support this type of assessment?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that, and I'm going to share my screen just for a moment to show what I'm talking about. And I also want to just, again, thank you guys for including me in this conversation, because I'm getting ideas just as I'm listening to you all talk, so this is just so great. So some of the features that are available now are around, as we heard about having either you or students create content. So I'm going to go to my dashboard for a moment, which for anybody who's new to LabXchange, this is where you can create your own content and classes. So I can add new content here. I can add assessment questions. Coming very soon, I'll be able to bundle those and add them as an assignment as well. Right now, we have some limited choices around multiple select and short answer, but we're excited to be building additional interactive formats like drag and drop that will allow students to really flex those muscles and make more connections than are possible here. But what I love about these particular problems is that, as we think about being in an asynchronous learning environment, in the fall, we can add questions here. You can add pictures. You can have students look at data. You can have them, link to other resources as needed. You can have the answers here, but then you can also add, you know, hints, feedback. You can have feedback that shows up if they've selected a particular subset of answers. So, you know, it's a great set of features if you can't be right there with them to guide them through that process to help them get themselves back on track. And I would say that any of the assessments that you find in our library or any of the simulations that you might use have assessments with similar features like this. So that's one thing to think about. And then the other idea that I, you know, am a big proponent of is students creating their own pathways, as was mentioned, you know, to showcase their process as they're solving a problem, to showcase, you know, maybe what their goals are. So, you know, I was just thinking about this. So I can go to my learner dashboard for a second just to show what your students will see. It's really the same process for everybody. So here's a pathway. So, you know, this pathway could be, you know, how students progress through an engineering challenge. It could be, you know, how they're understanding the importance of, you know, organelles in the cell, or it could be, you know, my plan for the unit. How do I want to grow as a student? What do I want to, you know, achieve? What are my learning objectives for myself as I progress through this, you know, short or long-term experience? And so in that way, then they can add content either from the public library or from things that they're creating in order to support demonstrating how they are meeting those particular goals. Some other ideas to think about: you could have students create pathways and share them with each other, and then students can make a copy of that and annotate them as sort of a commentary on what other students have done. You could have students use the discussion forum in the classes in order to run through different protocols for reviewing work. So there's really a lot of different ways you could think about to you know, have students get involved in creating that content. One of the things that I've pulled up here to show you is an idea around project-based learning for students, you know, using the platform to show mastery. So this is a private pathway. This is just a design, but it gives you a sense of what's possible. So this is walking students through the background that they would need in order to, you know, understand an issue in their community and how they might start to assess it. And this is all leading up to students being able to create their own community action plan. So you could substitute, you know, capstone project or anything else that you wanted to put in there. And this is leveraging our case study asset type, which is new and coming soon to be able to edit that. But this allows you to create a project that really can have any you know, sections that you want. Students will be able to put in different kinds of media here and really showcase you know, a big achievement or project that they've completed. So I'm giving you guys a little sneak peek into some things that are coming soon. So not everything is there today, but that's some of the ways that we're working to build you know, deeper assessments for students.
So Jessica, Cindy's asking, how do students share their content with the class?
Yeah, great question. So any of the content on the platform, whether it's a pathway or an individual piece of content, has a URL. And so you can share that URL with anybody you like. If it's from the public library, anybody can see that. If it's something that you have created, so it has this little lock, it's private content, the person just has to be logged into a LabXchange account in order to see that content.
I'm muted. We're going to go here in just a quick second over to hopefully hearing from some of you and allowing you to share your screens and let us see the pathways you've created so far. Again, don't be shy. If there are holes in your pathway, that's a good thing. This is an opportunity for us to work together as a community and maybe come up with some solutions now over the next, you know, week or so as people have time to think about it, about the holes that you have in that content, if any. So if you are interested in sharing, please let us know in the chat, and hopefully some of you are willing to do that. We're also interested if you are afraid to share because you really hit a roadblock. We'd like to hear from you too. We'd like to hear about what those roadblocks are. Finally, if you have any specific platform questions, let us know that in the chat too. What may very well happen is that at the end of this session, we may let those of you who wish to go a little bit early and then have a little bit of a refresher or 101 for those of you who need it. So is anybody willing to share what you've created so far in your pathway? You can go ahead and say in the chat or unmute. All right, Jennifer Gentry is interested in both sharing and has some specific questions. So Jennifer, I'm gonna ask you to unmute there. And what I am not sure is, oh, okay, now you're a co-host, so now you can share your screen. Perfect.
Okay, I'm pulling it up. Give me just a minute here.
No problem.
So I work
You get the
for-
bravery prize, so you take all the time you want.
Well, I'm excited to have some questions answered. So I work for Vanderbilt Center for Science Outreach, and we're helping with Metro Nashville Public Schools as they try to figure out what they're doing. So while I've been kind of experimenting with a project, I've been working on, sorry, I'm trying to do both things at the same time.
Well, Jennifer, while you're pulling that up, I'll just give you a second to think.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to mention that all the presentations that that we've been doing, besides the recordings, but the PowerPoints that I presented, along with a lot of other documentation, are actually in the LabXchange courses that we've created for these PLCs. So it's in the STEM pedagogy and practices. So if you aren't a member of that course, you'll want to, maybe Jessica, maybe you could put the course code up for us in the chat, and we can, and so you can go there and join that class, and you'll have access to all the presentations that we've done, as well as some additional materials. And just as an FYI, Lakeisha and I worked in MNPS, that's where we worked. And so we're big fans of MNPS.
What school were you at?
Well, we've worked all over, but the school we were talking about was Bailey STEM Magnet.
Okay. Yeah, so Bailey became Stratford, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I worked at Stratford a couple of years ago.
Oh, okay. Cool.
It actually had to become Stratford.
We weren't thrilled about that decision, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I heard you guys had a great principal. Anyway, okay, so I will share the screen, and okay. So what my partner and I have been working on is a series on, I don't know if you guys have seen Minute Earth videos, but they have one, Are We Really 99% Chimp? So we're designing a heredity unit around that, and we have the whole thing pretty much designed, but we're trying to find a good platform to take it online. So I started using that to create a pathway in here. Just thinking. And I can just ask you some of my really simple questions first. So one of the things is we've got a whole PowerPoint. Some of the activities that we're using are PowerPoints where we're looking at different traits and having the kids think about what's genetic and what's environmental. So is there a way to incorporate any kind of a presentation into LabXchange? I don't know why it's not updating. Or do I have to take that and put it into a text?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So I think the choice is yours in terms of the user experience that you're looking for. So you could certainly make it one text or a few different texts, or even have individual images if that's appropriate, and kind of make a pathway out of it. Or if the PowerPoint is really not the focus of the whole presentation, it's just context, you can make it a PDF and you can upload it as a document, and that can just also be part of your pathway.
Okay. So now that
I'm sorry, real quick, Jennifer. Jessica, is there any, I know you can do it both ways, and I'm sure there's circumstances for both, but in general, for people who are starting, is there one of those choices that's kind of a best practice as far as you've seen?
I mean, I imagine just popping in a document is probably the easiest rather than trying to remake a text or an image.
Thank you, and sorry for interrupting.
Oh, that's okay. So I'm trying to get back into it. I had it open, but now it's not showing up in here. So, okay, here we go. Okay, so I've got my pathway here. You guys can see that, right? All right. So I've got the video in there, which that worked great. And then I converted one of the text slides. So what I was trying to do was create a self-organized learning environment where they could go in here and click on different websites to do a little bit of on their own reading just to kind of start everything off. But then I was trying to think about ways that they could communicate. And I think, so I had the idea of a flip grid in here for 5th, 6th grade, but I really like the idea of the kids making their own pathways. Can you guys give me a little more input, Jessica, maybe you especially, like how that would go about, like how I would put that in there for instructions for them to create a pathway, how they would share it as a class. And I love the idea of them being able to annotate things, but I'm just not quite seeing how to go about that.
So, and can I just clarify, you said this is for 5th and 6th grade students?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. So one of the challenges that we always run into is that the functionality and some of the content is really great for younger students, but there's a limitation that you do need to be 13 in order to create an account on our platform. So that would be a sort of a barrier here. But what I would offer is that the same mentality works on paper. This is what we do at workshops. So you can have students create cards, create descriptions of their learning experiences, almost like they're sort of working together to put together a slide deck or something like that. So you can still use that mix and match philosophy even without the, actual creating it on the platform.
So that's fine. And actually all of these we're doing at all different levels up to the high school level. But is there any plans, like with Google Docs, you can go in and have the parents sign off on it? So for kids under 13, would they be able to do that? Or are you guys considering, because that is really problematic for our stuff because it would require multiple platforms.
Yeah, and for us, those are two different questions. We certainly want to be able to do that, but we are built on the Open edX framework, and so there's some collaboration with edX that's needed in order to do some of that deeper integration.
So you don't know, or it's not going to?
I would say definitely not in the next year. It is certainly something that's very much on our radar, but it's
Okay.
I would not count on it for this coming school year.
Okay. And are there any plans for any kind of virtual meetings? Like, for example, when they're in Google Classroom, now there's the Google Meet function. Are there any, because I think the platform is really fantastic and I see so much possibility for our schools to be able to utilize it and our teachers to be able to utilize it, and even for professional development for our teachers. But having the ability to actually virtually meet like this within the platform would be a really nice addition as well.
Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. I think at the moment we have a lot of other features that we're building out, so I don't think that's on the roadmap just yet, but definitely something we can consider. And in the interim, I'll say that the posting to the discussion forums is just about instantaneous. So to the extent that you want to moderate, a discussion or feedback that way, that's how I would do it.
Okay. So really that's as far as I've gotten with it. And I think those were all of my questions. Yeah, I think that's
Perfect.
it.
Jennifer, thank you for sharing what you've done so far.
Sure.
We really appreciate it. And we love hearing the struggles. Not that we want you to struggle, but the struggles are really a good insight for us as we kind of move forward in collaboration with LabXchange, and also give us insights into the things that other folks will run into. So we really appreciate all of that. And thank you for your work on this. Sarah Geithner is also interested in sharing her pathway so far and may have some questions as well. Sarah, are you there with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Sarah. You're a co-host now, so you should have screen sharing access.
Where will I find that? Oh, got it. Maybe.
Should be a green button down at the bottom. It says share screen.
Okay, so, yep, can you see it?
Yeah.
There we see it.
Okay. So I'm kind of at this spot too where I started something. I teach high school chemistry and I'm kind of in a real flux and maybe a little anxious about the fall. I'm in New York State. We have no guidance yet what the fall will look like. And so I was trying to create something that maybe I could start the year with and would be a little bit flexible where I could leave things in, take things out, depending on what occurs. So I kind of started with maybe like I want to incorporate a little more like what do scientists do, sort of what real life scientists, and I saw a lot of great videos that would help with that. I kind of put in like our first lab that we usually do for day one, I put in there, but I was able to also link in a YouTube video of similar to what we do and what they could watch it and do that. So I guess I'm kind of on my way. My one question would be, is there an easy way to like turn on and turn off parts of the pathway? Because if I go to edit, at first I saw the little eyeball here, and I thought that meant that you could maybe like hide that and turn it back on, but it doesn't work that way, does it?
So Jessica, if there are things that you're not quite ready for, you're still developing, or things you're not ready for your kids to see yet, what are our options there for not making content visible?
Yeah, this is a great question. And Sarah, I think this is such a cool idea of kind of developing these contingency plans, because you don't know necessarily what's coming. So what I might recommend is creating a copy of this that you can take things out of. So I would have your canonical, like, really full version of the pathway, like here's everything I might want to include, and then I would have your copy that you can just sort of take things out of as you like, but that way you don't forget what you had wanted to include. But I think this is the pathway tool is designed to be really flexible, to allow you to take things out, put things in almost instantaneously. I'm not sure if anybody thought of being able to temporarily hide something. It's a great idea, so I'll pass it on to the team, but at the moment that functionality doesn't exist.
Okay. I guess my other question too is I didn't really play with it enough to, in my pathway, if I want to have, like, for instance, I put in this video and then I had kind of open questioning about that I wanted them to respond to. If I want to, do I need to create like a new pathway and then link that pathway into this pathway if I want it to be like instantaneous, like they watch the video and then they have to answer the questions before they can go on to the next part of the pathway?
Gotcha. Well, so there's a couple of things that I would recommend. One you can do now, one you can do soon. So the thing you could do now is sort of leverage student metacognition and just put in an assessment question that says, now you need to stop and go post to the discussion forum, or here's a Google Doc where I want you to put your thoughts. Did you do that? Yes or no? And hopefully they will have culpability in their answer, and then they can continue on. You can also make very short pathways so that it's clear that this is the end of the pathway and you need to finish this before you start the next thing. And then the coming soon part is we're working on annotated videos. And so that will give you the ability to, within the video itself, just like Edpuzzle or something like that, you can pop in questions, links to articles. You can even put in a simulation if you want to. So that will give you a lot more control over embedding that kind of assessment.
I like that a lot.
Sarah, any other questions for us or for the other people watching today? Is there any content that you're needing or missing, or what else would help?
Yeah, I guess like the hard part about this is like a very introductory unit. So we get into matter, and we're going to be talking like our introduction to particle diagramming, which is something pretty kind of foundational and needed, and something they really don't do until they get to like chemistry at this level.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really looking for or like measurement, like it's hard if we're not at school and they don't have metric unit measurement equipment. I'm looking for something that I can do or give them to do at home that would be possible. So any suggestions there would be helpful.
Perfect. So virtual labs on the things you normally and ideally would do in real life, but that your kids may not have access to potentially. Is that kind of around measurement and diagramming in particular?
Yeah.
Okay. If anybody here knows any of those resources, please either unmute, raise your hand, or say so in the chat. If not, however, between Keisha and Julie and myself, I know I have some folks in this world that I think have some labs that they could tell me about that we could forward on to you. So thank you a ton for sharing your pathway so far, Sarah. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
I'll step in for a sec because it's in response to Sarah's. I think, and you know, I'm not in the classroom this year, but if I were going back into the classroom right now, and this is what I'm telling everybody, I like that your pathway doesn't just jump right into like something that feels like standard-based content, that it's giving them some exposure generally to the field and what they see. It's going to be so important this year that we do not rush into like that feeling of, well, our first test is in the first 3 weeks and here's what we're going to do and we're going to start progress and all that stuff. I would argue that the first 30 to 90 days, honestly, needs to be you understanding your scholars as young STEMists, as young scientists, and building kind of their world experience. Get the information about what they're living through right now and how that is related to something that's on LabXchange that you can expose them to. It's hard right now, I think, because we don't know what's happening. I don't know if you know who your students are going to be, like if you'll be looping up or if you get a new group of students, how often, because schools are doing hybrid models and all kinds of different things. But I would honestly, keep with the mode of, I just want to expose my students in this first time. I want us to be comfortable with each other. I want them to be able to ask me questions about science, about labs, about all this stuff. But I don't want my kids to feel like we're automatically just moving into academics and there's no time for me to hear from them. It's through those conversations that you will find that project that your class can do together, that you'll find small groups that can work on certain things together and then use LabXchange to build that up, especially with some of these cool functions like the case studies coming up and stuff. So be okay with having your students be a part of that planning process with you in that first like 15 to 30 days of school. See, I would extend it longer than that, but it's okay if it doesn't go straight into content. And I appreciate that about your pathway. So keep going with that idea of like exposure and then figure out what's really important to the kids right now in terms of science. What problems are they trying to solve at home in terms of science? And then how can we build something together using LabXchange, using personal videos, all those things to learn together. So just make your kids a part of that process. They have a lot of good answers.
Thank you, Keisha. I appreciate that. Is anybody else interested in sharing before we move on to some closing thoughts from Keisha and potentially some one-on-one kinds of things for those of you who need it? Anybody else want to share their pathway so far? All right, that's okay. Listen, I get shy in these things too. What I'm really hoping that you will do is take the time, both in the survey, the post-opportunity survey that Keisha will be sharing shortly, as well as just in emails to us, and you can email that info@stemecosystems.org website, or I'm sorry, email address, to let us know what worked, what didn't. We want this to be a tool that meets your needs as much as possible. And that means that we really, really want the things that worked great for you and also the things that you struggled with a little bit so that the tool can evolve over time, training can evolve over time to make sure that we're meeting everyone's specific needs. So we really do appreciate the work that you did on all of this so far. In our conversations, we heard about some really kind of exciting pathways, and I'm really excited. I am not excited for the start of the school year, but with all of the terribleness, I am excited to see how some of these pathways and these tools are used. And we really hope that you'll continue to share us with that, and we'll also continue to reach out with you as the school year starts. I did ask in the chat if anybody in here today is brand new and needs kind of a 101 refresher. I've not seen that that's the case so far, so I'm going to assume that it's not. But if you didn't see that in the chat and that is a thing that you would need, please go ahead and let us know. I think we're going to have a few minutes at the end where others could drop off and we could share that. So before we close, Keisha, what can you tell? Julie, do you want to say something that looks like?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, inside so we have the 3 courses, and Jessica put the links to those 3 courses into the chat box. And so the one course that everyone was a part of is the STEM Pedagogy and Practices. That's where all of the presentations are that we've done through this. And then there were the 3 breakout sessions, which we did those first 2 meeting sessions. And inside the one that's about district leaders, I put some of our PLC group had put some links to and some resources, articles about best practices for digital learning, some really great research-based articles in there. So, you know, please be sure to, be a part of that class. You can join with the class code, check out those articles that are in there, some links on the discussion board as well. And then I think the other two courses may have some additional links and information as well. So you can pop in there to get that. So I just wanted to leave you with that.
Perfect. Thank you, Julie. Keisha, are you still there with us? There you are.
Yeah. I did post the link to the post survey in the chat. It will be super helpful, especially the questions about like who you are, why you're using it. And then there's two questions, kind of the peaks and valleys, if you will, of the platform, what's very useful in terms of some of the functions. And then you'll see a bunch of stuff listed, but also what kind of is either not so helpful, or do we need to kind of think about vamping up or giving the Harvard team an opportunity to implement in some way. So super important, because we want both your vision as educators and leaders, and we want the LabXchange team's vision of this being a very usable tool coming up next school year. We want it to come to fruition. So please do the post surveys. Thank you so much for joining our PLCs. We are going to work on sending out the videos to everything. So if you missed one, or if you just want to pass it along to a colleague or whatever, you'll be able to do that. We'll probably, don't quote me, but we'll probably send out an email with a reminder link to the post survey and those video recordings within the next few days. I'll get with Angie and Veronica and a few other people to make sure that gets out to you guys. But don't hesitate to ask questions. Know that as a community of practice, we are all doing this together and learning from one another. Yeah, whatever questions you have, let us know. We'd be happy to continue to support.
So on behalf of Keisha, Julie, Jessica, and the rest of the TIES, STEM Ecosystems, and Harvard LabXchange teams, we all really appreciate the time that you've spent on these pathways. We've learned a lot. We hope that you've learned a lot as well, and learned some new tools and resources that will make teaching and learning under this new environment just a little bit easier. Again, please make sure to fill out that link. It's in the chat right now. Go ahead and click on it before the session closes, but I'm sure it will be in the follow-up email as well. And please remember that if you have any questions, concerns, ideas, thoughts, please send those to info@stemecosystems.org and put LabXchange pilot in the subject line so that we can get those all together and share them. Thank you again. We've really, really liked working with all of you, and it's been really exciting to see some of the different ways that these tools can be used. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.